Welcome everyone. I'm Fran Burwell. I'm one of the vice presidents here at the Atlantic Council. Many thanks for joining us today. A special welcome to Madam President. It is a genuine honor to have you here. And a warm welcome to Ambassador Sitaku. Many thanks to you and your staff for making this event possible. As yesterday in Brussels made clear, Europe today is facing several crises. Its security and the safety of its citizens is threatened by a malevolent force, but one that has managed to burrow within European society and ours as well. Europe is also threatened externally. While its borders and neighborhoods used to be calm, that's no longer the case. Whether it is Russian aggression in Ukraine, or failed transitions to democracy in North Africa, or civil conflict in Syria, Europe is now surrounded by instability and conflict. Although the Eurozone crisis has abated, continuing slow economic growth has undoubtedly helped fuel political extremism in Europe, which is now becoming distressingly common. Over the last year, we have seen refugees from the wars on Europe's borders arrive in unprecedented numbers, with tragic stories and real needs, but also causing much disruption. The response to these challenges has come lately within the European Union, NATO, and among the European and transatlantic member states, including the United States. But we need to be mindful of those countries that are not yet within those structures, but whose future is clearly in Europe and as members of the transatlantic partnership. We must especially look to the Balkans, where the end of the Cold War first brought conflict, but then also independent nations, including Kosovo. Born out of war, these countries have mostly worked to rebuild regional stability and peace, to reform difficult and often corrupt economies, and to establish new political systems that can provide for broad representation and good governance. The road has not been easy, and it is not yet done. You, Madam President, have been a leader in that effort, a forward-looking personality who has worked for the long-term good of your people. But as Europe faces these crises, the Balkans, including Kosovo, now face even more challenges. The door to Europe is less welcoming, perhaps, although we will see Montenegro go into NATO this year. And the conditions for entrance have become very difficult, both for countries and for citizens. But that does not mean we should despair or turn our backs. In fact, on the contrary, at the Atlantic Council, we believe that these tough times require more engagement in the Balkans and Kosovo, not less. We must help these countries continue to move forward, even as we must be clear about the continuing need for economic reform, for good governance, for finding a way to bring even more stability to the entire region. As you, Madam President, come to the end of your term in office, we want to acknowledge your great contributions to your country and your region, but we also want to hear from you how we can best help Kosovo and the Western Balkans move forward. I'm delighted now to introduce my good colleague, Evelyn Farkas, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, Eurasia, and the Balkans. She has been involved in the Balkans since serving as a human rights officer with the OSCE in the 1990s. And we're very pleased she's joined the Atlantic Council as a senior fellow. She will introduce the President and moderate the discussion afterwards. Evelyn.
Thank you very much, Fran. And it's really an honor to be able to introduce President Jahjaga today. Welcome to the Atlantic Council. Welcome, Madam Ambassador. Welcome to everybody here. This is a unique opportunity to hear directly from someone who has been really a true leader in every sense of the word and a true friend of the United States. So I want to just say a few things about the President's biography. First of all, she was elected President in 2011. She's got a lot of firsts. She was the first woman elected President of Kosovo, but she was also the first woman elected President in the Balkans. She was the first President elected in Kosovo on the first round. She is also the youngest president of Kosovo, and maybe youngest Balkans president. And that really doesn't, all of those first don't do her justice. As I mentioned, she has a lot of unique attributes as a politician and as a person. I just want to also mention, though, because I think it's very relevant to today's discussion, prior to becoming president, she had a long career in the security services, actually in the police force, rising up to the position of deputy of the Kosovo police force. And so she has a lot of experience, and that has obviously come to the fore, and I hope we'll hear a little bit more about how that has informed your perspective on Kosovo today and Kosovo in the future. When I mentioned these personal attributes, Kosovo obviously has been under a tremendous pressure internally, externally. It's a new country. It's in a country that's been in transition for quite some time now, and it's continuing along this road. And really, the president has provided, not just because of her office, but again, as I mentioned, because of her personality, a strong, firm hand. She's been a conciliatory individual. She's been an arbiter. She's been a uniter. She's been a broker. Every time I made trips with Assistant Secretary Newland to Kosovo and we sat down and talked to the president, we would hear about what she was doing to bring members of the government together to help us help Kosovo. She gave us very blunt, insights and perspectives. But everything was in the spirit of working together with the United States, working together with the government, bringing various parties together in the parliament, outside the parliament. And that's something that we like to think that maybe a little bit of America rubbed off on you, Madam President, because the other thing that is distinct in her background for someone from the Balkans and also at a young age taking this helm is that she had a substantial amount of experience working and doing things in the United States through U.S. programs. So again, this relationship we built with you was built early on. So I want to just say a few other things. She also recently spoke out, and this was again in the spirit of leadership, on violence against women in wartime. And that's something that we don't often hear enough about, especially not, I think, even in the context of the Balkans. And there are people who are still very recently dealing with this subject. And I think to have the president of a Balkan country come out and say this is an issue and we should recognize what these survivors are doing, how they're coping with this, and shed some light on it, I think is very helpful, not just from the Balkan perspective, but obviously from the international perspective. So before we turn the podium to you, Madam President, I just want to, for the audience, add a few things to really just add some meat to the bones that Fran put out for us with regard to the situation Kosovo faces. As I mentioned, it's a country in transition. So first of all, it's a state that's still building itself. There are institutions that still remain to be built. Kosovo does not yet have an armed forces. They're in the process of hopefully establishing an armed forces. The institutions are still young. The processes are not yet robust. So there's a lot of state building that still needs to be done. The international community, as many know here, has not completely coalesced behind Kosovo. So there are the non-recognizers in the EU context, 5 countries that refuse to recognize Kosovo, unfortunately. And hopefully we can talk some more about that. But that is obviously a challenge for Kosovo. Then, of course, Kosovo is also a developing democracy, developing economy. So that entails a lot of hard work that needs to be done. And as part of the developing democracy and developing economy, Kosovo is also working to integrate into the European institutions. So they have set for themselves, the government of Kosovo has set a goal of becoming a member of the EU as well as of NATO. So we will talk about that, but obviously there's a lot of work to be done there. There are some very good recent successes. The EU in October signed a stabilization and association agreement with Kosovo, which was ratified by the European Parliament in January. But of course, there's some things that Kosovo needs to do as well along that path. So again, we'll talk about that. There's the normalization process with Serbia, which of course all of the EU membership, that whole process is dependent on making progress with with Serbia on normalization. And the United States has been a very active partner in that process, and so we'll look forward to hearing more about that. And then finally, as Fran mentioned, the European context, the foreign fighters, the migration issues, the economic issues. I think we have a lot that we can actually learn from Kosovo because of the president's recent experience dealing with those issues as well. So I've probably spoken too long, and I'll have a chance to drill down with you on some of these issues. So without further ado, Madam President.
Well, good afternoon, and dear Ms. Farkas, dear Fran, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, and please allow me, before I start my remarks today, to express my deepest condolences to the latest victims on the attack that has taken place in Brussels the day that I have landed here in Washington. So our thoughts and our prayers are with the Brussels and with the families, and this is another proof and evidence that we need to further cooperate among ourselves. 17 years ago to this date in this capital and those of the NATO European allies, a courageous decision was made to intervene in humanitarian grounds to stop the war crime and the ethnic cleansing committed on Albanians in Kosovo by Serbia's state apparatus. The decision to conduct a bombing campaign against military targets to stop Serbia's repression and force its withdrawal from Kosovo made much history. For the first time in the history of the North Atlantic Alliance, it fought a war on the grounds of the regional security. Not for territory, not for resources, but for the principles, against a state whose sovereignty lost legitimacy when it began to persecute and oppress its citizens on grounds of their ethnicity. The brutality unleashed in Kosovo at the dawn of the 21st century was not unknown to leaders in Europe and the United States. It followed the Carnegie in Rwanda and much closer to Kosovo in Bosnia. They weighed heavily in the minds of decision makers. It challenged all of us to think to what use were their alliances, unions of nations, conventions, laws, and charters, if we were repeatedly failing to protect and unprecedented from systematic state-sponsored violence. In Kosovo, they lived up to their names and aims. The intervention stopped the war and brought to Kosovars the much-sought peace and freedom. The international community, the United Nations, NATO, and a plethora of international organizations heavily engaged in peacekeeping duties and in institution building as they helped steer Kosovo to democracy and free market economy. About 1 million refugees returned home in the first days after the conflict ended. After almost 10 years of active international involvement in what has been a remarkable journey of state building, Kosovo declared independence in 2008. And as we approach our first decade as an independent state, I can confidently say that we have managed to recover, to overcome, and to move forward. By and large, our ability to progress from a state of war to rule of law in a short span of time was a direct outcome of the security established on the ground and the determination of the American and European allies to stay committed to peace and stability in the Balkans. This security was provided by 50,000 NATO troops deployed initially in Kosovo, a country of 2 million in a territory of the size of Connecticut that would be a guarantor of peace, and thousands of United Nations police officers who set up the parameters of law and order. Security and the exit strategy were tightly linked to the foundation of the new security institutions that we were to create, guided so generously by the international community. It relied on creation of trust, certainty, and predictability. We have assumed responsibility for the safety of all in Kosovo through the Kosovo Police, a trusted institution that reflects the ethnic balance in Kosovo. We are in the process of transforming our Rapid Response Force into the Kosovo Armed Forces, a defense force that reflects the ambitions and the interests of the country, and is being created in a gradual and phased approach in line with a detailed review of our security sector that embraces NATO standards. In this next phase of completing the trappings of the sovereign state responsible for its own security, our intention is to build a flexible and modern defense force that will be an asset to the regional security and will help to maintain Europe's peace. Due to this gradual handover, only 3,000 NATO troops are now on the ground, and they no longer conduct patrols or man checkpoints. But their presence remains an important cornerstone of security in the Balkans, because even 15 years after of active engagement, there is unfinished business in the region. We recognize that most of the challenges that stand on the way of the Balkan countries' road to accession in NATO and the EU are internal, such as the existence of the endemic corruption, the economic monopoly of the powerful elites, and other consequences of bad governance, and incomplete rule of law, and they are potent threats. But what we must also recognize is the huge leap that the region has made in the past 2 decades, the kind of the progress that would have been impossible without European and North Atlantic integration perspective on the table. That has been an overarching incentive to reform, to engage with one another, to even make progress where one would have been unimaginable several years ago. The attention required today in the Balkans is no longer one of the emergency. It is one of adapting to the Balkans the model Europe already tested and tried successfully half of a century ago. Our strategic goal is membership in NATO and the European Union, a goal shared by the majority of the political spectrum in Kosovo. We see no other alternative to it. And while I know that our efforts are complicated by the non-recognitions of 4 NATO members and the sometimes stalled reform at home, I would like for us to think ahead and really see this momentum as an opportunity to change the course of the history for the Western Balkan countries. With one exception in the region, our shared vision is to become part of the larger umbrella of the security, because we are convinced that is the only way that will guarantee a lasting peace and a lasting stability. NATO's recent history to offer formal membership to Montenegro is the much-needed positive step, as is the EU decision to grant membership status to Albania and Serbia, and to sign the Stabilization and Association Agreement with Kosovo as the first step towards the European integration. We can never consider security separated from the political situation, which we also have made serious efforts to address, in large part because of our aspiration to join the European Union, and in Kosovo's case, into NATO. Despite the animosities that still hold and the difficulty to engage in dialogue with one's former enemy, the governments of Kosovo and Serbia are trying to normalize the relations in the EU-brokered process. This effort has been far from perfect. The lack of tangible implementation and the ambiguity that has surrounded it have not been helpful. But the 2 countries have been bound by the EU conditionality to resolve their disputes before either state can be considered for the membership. To Kosovo, that means full recognition of its independence by Serbia before Serbia can join the European Union. Anything short of recognition would reverse decades of investment and efforts to pacify the Balkans and to set it on the road of prosperity. My dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, there is now time for enlargement fatigue. The Western Balkans countries have come halfway, and we are in need of another push that would set us off on a path to the kind of progress that cannot be reversed. EU and NATO integration are not a cure for all, I agree. But without this option clearly and firmly on the table, our future becomes uncertain. The vacuum, the limbo in which we find ourselves certainly has opened up an opportunity to powers and agendas that have traditionally sought to undermine any chance of success in the Balkans and beyond. And today, we find ourselves squeezed between Russia's anti-West policy and various Islamist agendas, which seeks to exploit the pent-up frustration, the isolation, the lack of economic prosperity, the general stagnation. Too much has been invested in the stability of Kosovo, of Bosnia, of Albania, of Macedonia, Montenegro, and Serbia. We are all finally getting our acts together, but we need help to stay the course. We do not seek shortcuts, and our path to the European Union and NATO should continue to be conditioned with our own ability to fulfill the important criteria, but we must not lose sight of what is of strategic importance. We are an integral part of Europe, and we must be treated as such. Today, the citizens of Kosovo are the only people in Europe who cannot travel visa-free to the rest of Europe. The only other country where they can travel without a visa is Turkey. We are eager to be seen as an added value, to be part of Europe's solution and not a generator of problems. And we vow to do our part. Let me make a security-related example. In the past 4 years, Kosovo's institutions have effectively confronted the challenge posed by the foreign fighters, citizens of Kosovo who have joined ISIL. In 2013 and 2014, about 200 Kosovo citizens traveled to Syria and Iraq, which makes us one of the top countries with a number of foreign fighters per capita. We have been uncompromising on our approach as soon as we became aware that we, too, have been affected by this phenomenon. Our first reaction has been to learn everything, from recruiters down to their finances and routes, learning about their ties and their intentions. We have acted swiftly and decisively against the ones that have returned, putting them through our legal system. On recruiters, we have been on the mark. Arrests have led us to several dozens of imams with the connections to Macedonia and to Albania. We have shut down illegal mosques and NGOs that have acted as front for their activities, especially in money laundering and in indoctrination. This challenge to our security has had another immediate effect. We have renewed some of old partnerships and have started some new ones, particularly in our immediate neighborhood, that have led to the major arrests. We have updated our laws and approved new ones to ensure that our sovereignty and legal independence does not become a catalyst for those seeking to pursue this path. Cooperation has been key, as has been the realization that we must do our own homework. Despite the presence of NATO troops and the largest EU rule of law mission, it was our law enforcement agencies that took the responsibility to make Kosovo the European front line of the fight in the terrorist networks. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, before I conclude, let me offer a few thoughts on our most recent challenge. We examined several questions today on the anniversary of the Kosovo intervention against the backdrop of another crisis at the gates of Europe. As I speak, there are Syrian refugees, as well as migrants from strife-stricken countries from the Middle East and beyond that have amassed in Europe's most fragile territory, in no man's land between Greece and neighboring Macedonia, and now most recently in Albania. There are assumptions that Albania and Kosovo are the next as refugees and migrants scramble to find new routes to take them north to Western Europe, which is their main destination. And I join the Prime Minister of Albania to say that we will not open our borders, not for the lack of our will, but because of our inability to offer the needed care. But we will also not erect walls. The suffering of the Syrian refugees feels so close to our skin. During Kosovo War, 1 million Kosovo Albanians, half of Kosovo's population, were expelled from their homes. We were forced in neighboring countries, where despite the fears that refugees from Kosovo may somehow take over their countries, we were welcomed with open arms. Some 600,000 refugees were taken in by Albania, which had very limited resources, being one of the poorest countries in Europe. In Macedonia too. But 3 months later, when the US-led intervention stopped the Serbian aggression, 1 million refugees rushed back to their homes. I remember aid agencies in panic about landmines and the destruction left behind by the war. But to the refugees who never wanted to leave their homes, this moment to return to their homes could not have come fast enough. They all went back to their homes. They all came back to their homes in less than 2 weeks after war has ended. In this debate, we must be reminded that the refugees are consequences of the war. To stop their flow, we must address the cause that pushed them to leave in the first place. We need to be remembered that they are people forced to leave their homes, and nobody wants to ever leave their home. No one wants to be somebody else's burden. And while we are all learning that there is no single way to address migration and that every European country will deal with it in its own way, we must ensure that our resources and our actions are joined. I thank you everyone for the attention today.
Madam President. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. That was a very strong statement. There's a lot in there, and our time is so short, given all of the really interesting things that you put out for us. I think it was I felt the emotion when you talked about Syria and the refugees, and I think that's a very excellent point that you made about addressing the causes of the war. And so if we have time and maybe in the questions, I'm not going to ask that question about what we should do in Syria, but maybe someone else will. But I'm interested, I mean, you are now wrapping up your tenure as president. And so you're looking back, but you may also be looking forward. Your successor has been chosen. Prime Minister Thaçi will take over. And what would you like him to actually take on as priorities as he takes office?
Yeah.
What do you think is most important for Kosovo, basically, out of all of the things?
My friend, first of all, it's really a pleasure to see you. And we had numerous of the meetings in Kosovo. It's really a pleasure to see you here. This question I always expect to be asked in Kosovo, but I never thought that the question would be asked in Washington, D.C. Being a president, it's more than assuming the highest office in the country, because there is the combination of the roles and responsibility that every president, every head of state he or she has on their own shoulders. First of all, fulfilling these constitutional requirements, because all of us are bound by some roles and responsibilities which are written in our own constitution as first. Second is to conduct the role of the unifying figure, which is one of the hardest things to be conducted, and particularly I have been facing personally as the president of Kosovo for this 5 years in the office.
So you will coach him?
Which has been one of the hardest things to conduct the unifying role across the party and across all of the community groups, no matter of the ethnicity and religions in our country. And but when you find that strength and the commitment that you rise yourself above some of the daily matters, then you will be able to finish everything what is required from the people, from the institution, and from your own constitution. At the moment, Kosovo is in a very critical phase. As you have been probably following the media, there is an ongoing political stalemate that has started about over 7 months ago in our country between the position and the opposition parties. At the same time, we have the huge EU integration process or the Euro-Atlantic integration agenda. Then there is a dialogue with Serbia, an ongoing dialogue that has also to pay a special attention to that. But also there is a quite wide domestic agenda which requires and more of the coordinated efforts from all of the political class in the country. And the president is that umbrella that offers that venue, that offers that table, that everybody should be equal on contributing to the country.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. The issues that are stalemated, and thank you for that answer, the issues where you have a stalemate are also the issues that should matter most to Kosovo. I mean, they're the obstacles to your integration. So the stalemate is on the border agreement that you have with Montenegro. That's very important if you're going to become a member of the EU or of NATO to have your borders resolved. Mm-hmm. The other issue where there's a stalemate has to do with some of the things that have to happen for visa liberalization for the EU, so the procurement oversight body appointing those people. So I know that that's not all in the president's purview, but obviously anything that helps Kosovo on the road to integration and also address domestic things, mm-hmm. domestic priorities would be useful. I want to now switch gears, if I can, and turn to the external. So you mentioned that now is not the time for enlargement fatigue. You mentioned outside powers that would come into the vacuum, and then you specifically mentioned Russia. You didn't really, you said, of course, all of this was directed at us here in the United States, but I wonder if I could draw you out a little bit more to ask you specifically, what is it that you would like our next president to do to help Kosovo and the Balkans? And I would agree with you that there is enlargement fatigue. We did a great job with the government of Montenegro rather, getting them to where they are now on the cusp of becoming a member of NATO, but we have a lot more work to do. And in this 20th anniversary environment of Dayton, we just passed last year, but there are a lot of more milestones coming up this year. We should be celebrating, we should be kind of finishing that unfinished business, but I don't feel the energy like you. I don't feel the energy. So what is it that you would ask the next president to do to help the Balkans, to help Kosovo, and also to deal with Russia and what Russia's doing to move into the vacuum? And I might also add, if you could go into a little more detail about what Russia's doing.
Now, we, as the countries individually in the southeastern part of the Europe that is very often used a term of the Western Balkans, we have made quite of the significant progress, and we did make a major leap forward as the country individually, but also as a region in entire. And but still, we are in the halfway as a region, and. A progress one step forward or one step backwards in one country in the region will definitely reflect positively or negatively in the other neighbor which is next to that. So the Western Balkan is very much connected as the region due to the events that has taken in the past, and so there is no time about this EU integration fatigue. And we do know that and I better say that There is no other alternative for none of the countries, neither for Kosovo, neither for Montenegro, Albania, Macedonia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Serbia than the EU integration and the Euro-Atlantic integration process. And we do not seek shortcuts from the European Union, definitely, but we have that momentum that has to be used very wisely in order to be translated into much more of the active and intensified reform process within our country. Because for me, for the institutions of Kosovo and for the people of Kosovo, when we speak about the European Union, when we speak about the homework and the reforms that we have to conduct as a country, we don't pass the message that these reforms are because of the EU. Definitely, those reforms are for us, for the well-being and for the improving of the daily life of our citizens. But at the same time, there has to be the incentives provided from the European Union. We do understand that the EU is still having some of the difficulties on their own with the refugees and other matters. But there is not a time, and we have to use the time in maximum now in order to drive that clear path of the EU integration. And we as the regional countries are sitting in the most important routes or in this channel from the east and towards the west. And the only way that can keep us in the right track as the regional countries is the Euro-Atlantic integration. We are in the halfway, I said in the very beginning, and we need the final push. So we as the countries, as the region, we will be able to move in the other half so we don't endanger and we don't take a risk on returning back where we used to be, that none of us want to be there. And there is a lot of efforts and investment that has been done from your side to bring us a region where we are today. Competition is growing, it's true, and the competition is growing not from some favored powers. Yes, indeed, we see an increased interest or the presence of the Russia into the southeastern part of the Europe or in the western Balkans. Pick and choose from the diplomatic, from economic, from the military, and the other fields. And we are finding ourselves as the small countries in that part of the Europe, squeezed between the Russia's the anti-Western policy and the foreign fighters, and is the only way that we move the region of our region forward to the further integration through the continuous and the presence of the United States in the region. It's no time yet for the United States to withdraw from the region, because this withdrawal, this momentum is being used by the others in that time, and we cannot afford that in the long term for the sake of future of our countries.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Madam President. And I think if I could, I would say that based on what I've heard from you, I think for the next president, it would be useful to put together some kind of strategy that was really focused on finishing the work that we need to do in the Balkans. And when it comes to integrating Kosovo and other Balkan countries into the EU, obviously the United States is not a member, but we have stood very solidly, as I mentioned earlier, behind the normalization process. We also very much believe everything that you're doing in terms of implementing the EU acquis communautaire, you know, the rules that you have to, the laws, the regulations that you need to implement in order to get into the EU. We support those because, of course, it helps your economic development, it helps your political development, and it helps you get to a place where then you will also be a good candidate for NATO membership. Now, I will say, and I know we don't have much time because I want to turn it over to the audience, but we are hopeful that your government can pass the constitutional amendment so that which will establish the basis, the very legal basis for a Kosovo armed forces, because that's the prerequisite to the other part of your integration, the security integration into NATO. Without that, you don't have strictly speaking, legally speaking, you don't have an armed forces, and therefore, obviously, we can't talk about NATO membership or what should be the prerequisite to that, which is the Partnership for Peace. So I very much look forward to either you, your predecessor, someone putting a little pressure on your government to put that amendment into place. so that we can move forward on the NATO part as well. And again, I think once you have armed forces, then we can talk PFP and we can work to deal with the non-recognizers.
Just a bit of the clarity on the issue of the transformation of the Kosovo security forces towards the Kosovo armed forces. In a very close partnership with our strategic allies and with the NATO strategic teams in Kosovo, we have done a planned stage process, an agreed process on the transformation of the Kosovo security force. And the transformation of Kosovo security force towards the Kosovo armed force enjoys the highest percentage of the trust from all people of Kosovo. The problem of not passing that in the government is not the government, it's itself the parliament, or better saying, it's the Serbian members of the parliament in Kosovo, which are unable to overcome that, because we have to go away of this nationalistic ideas of the past, or seeing the things, particularly of the security matters, from the shorter perspective. Because now is the momentum that we as a countries have to organize and reorganize ourselves of building the capacities, not only for our own security, but more for the regional security and for the global security. And that is the attention of us, of the Kosovo Security Force, to join to this global efforts of the security.
Thank you. That was a very good clarification. So I won't blame just the government. So with that, we have limited time, but I'm sure that we have excellent questions out there. So please raise your hands. I'll try to call on you, and we'll try to get you a microphone as fast as possible. I'll start from the front, right here on the aisle. And please identify yourself before you ask the question.
Yeah. Irina Gerovska, Macedonian TV. Madam President, it's nice to see you here. It's a country who is neighbor to Macedonia. I have to ask you about the latest attacks in Brussels, having in mind your background in the law enforcement. How big is the danger that the foreign fighters from Kosovo can carry out attacks in Europe after their return?
Carry out attacks, sorry.
I didn't understand.
Carry out, how big is the danger that
The Kosovo citizens who were foreign fighters can carry out attacks in the Balkans, in Europe, after their return in Kosovo?
Well, I did say also in my remarks that Kosovo has been and continues to be one of the leading countries in the region as regard of the effective fight against the extremism and every types of the radicalization. And within the less than 2 years, we have arrested about 61 Kosovo citizens that they have been at once joined the ISIS, al-Nusra, they have been traveling to Syria or Iraq. And we have shut down several of the mosques, and we have shut down several of the NGOs. And that has reflected in also intensifying the regional cooperation, including Bosnia, including Macedonia, and including Albania, where the imams, they have been coming from Macedonia to indoctrinate and to incite the people of Kosovo. We have been convincing the government to Macedonia to cooperate with us and to arrest these imams which have been coming from Macedonia to Kosovo. And recently you have been seeing the arrest that has taken place today for several of the citizens from our part of the region. And this information came exclusively from the intelligence services of Kosovo. And we as Kosovo have been rising ourselves beyond of this political difference that still do dominate in our region. But the security is beyond everything to our citizens. And we need to rise ourselves as the leaders of the region, be above of the daily politics, and offer the basic things what our citizens deserve, the safety and security. And on this, Kosovo is uncompromising, and we have been and we will continue to be in that regard.
In the back there with the red tie. I guess you wearing red, you got my attention. It was smart. And please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Rahim Rashidi with Kurdistan TV. What do you think of Kurdish freedom fighters' role in fight against ISIS? In your opinion, after Paris and the Brussels attacks, how important is it the Peshmerga should be armed? Thank you.
I would encourage every government, every country to cooperate as much as possible to fight this phenomena, to bring to those people to the justice, no matter where they are. They are the people that are not working in interest of our country, and they're not working in the interest of our people. And again, we need to raise ourselves above of daily politics and offer the basic thing what our citizens need: security.
Okay, right standing.
Alexander Dardeli with IREX. Madam President, very good to see you here. Congratulations. Just to put things in perspective a bit for the audience, independent Kosovo is only 8 years old, compared to 115 Albania, 150 Serbia, 25 Macedonia. So congratulations for the great strides you've made. You made a very eloquent and correct push for continued US involvement in the Balkans and against enlargement fatigue. I agree with both points. There's also another side of the medal, and in this sense my question is a bit different. Kosovo is a rather small country of about 2.2 million people. It is one of the largest recipients of official development assistance per capita. So much has been given to Kosovo, yet it faces some massive problems, such as the regional fragility that you identified, both the security of borders and the issue of the fighters, as well as an inner fragility having to do with a youth population, with a youth boom in Kosovo, and massive unemployment, youth unemployment. That's one issue. And perhaps you want to address it for this audience. I would appreciate that if you could. And number two, and perhaps more importantly, Kosovo consistently ranks as one of the most corrupt countries in the region, together with Albania. It has a very high degree of political impunity. What can Kosovo do better to make its case for EU membership vis-à-vis the issue of corruption? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. And yes, indeed, Kosovo is one of the youngest countries in the world that only 8 years ago we have gained our independence. And 16 years ago, Kosovo has come out of a terrible war, which has left deep wounds and deep consequences that even today's date we lived with those consequences. Over thousands of people which has been killed and massacred, over 20,000 women which has been direct victims of the sexual violence as a tool of war. And still 16 years after the end of the war, we have about 1,700 people missing still in the different massive graves in the territory of Serbia and within Kosovo. And despite that fact, Kosovo has made a huge leap forward. We have made a significant progress on the 16 years of liberty and 8 years of the independence. And there is many of the articles being written around the world that Kosovo is a success story of the huge partnership between the international community, institutions of Kosovo, and the people of Kosovo. And that's true. There is a lot of effort that has been put in Kosovo by international community in general to be moving together with the institutions of Kosovo and our people to come to this stage where we are. And for the many things we can turn our back behind and say we are proud of. There are some things that yes, we could do differently, but in the circumstances we had to overcome the stage that we had to overcome. Kosovo so far on these 8 years of independence has been recognized by 110 countries, is a member state of many of the international organizations. But still Kosovo is not a member state of the Interpol, Europol, SECI, and other regional and international organizations that deals with the security due to the vote against by our northern neighbor of Serbia and backed up and supported by the Russia. Yes, it's true, not only Kosovo, but other regional countries in the region have a problem with the corruption, with the organized crime. We could not be immune to that. But we have done an enormous job into trying to put necessary mechanisms in place in order to effectively tackle this phenomena, which one way is keeping hostage the daily life of our citizens, which is related to your estimation saying the low unemployment, the lack of the economic development, the lack of interest of the foreign investment in our country. But at the same time, is anyone in this room that can tell me how the organized crime, or better saying the corruption, can be fought under the isolation? None. And Kosovo is doing that. Kosovo, no matter that, is doing everything possible. We have to follow, and we have the people here in the room that used to become a United Nations members in our country. And we have to follow over 2 weeks of bureaucratic procedure for one single information, no matter on the organized crime and in the corruption. That has to go from the Kosovo police to the United Nations police, from United Nations to the EU police, from the EU towards the Interpol or any other organization, and the same procedure back. So that is too much of the time consuming. That for our institution, it requires much more additional efforts on doing that. So again, we should not use our political differences on making blockages to other countries when they are keen of doing some others. I don't want to put an amnesty in our institutions of our country or our leaders. Still, we have and we have conducted some extraordinary good projects in place. And as I'm not wrong, about last year we had about 16% have been increased on the fight against the corruption in our country. Still, there is a long way to go into that. But we need to have all the right tools in our hands in able to do the maximum as we want inside the country.
Okay, we're at 5 o'clock, but I see one more hand and only one more hand, so let me, at least that one I saw before, so I'll take the gentleman on the aisle. Identify yourself, and then this will be the last question.
Sorry, thank you. David Riley from the British Embassy here in Washington. Welcome, Madam President. I want to change tack slightly because my government has been working very closely with you in supporting those who have suffered and survived sexual violence in conflict. I want to put on record how grateful we are for your immense personal commitment to this cause. You've been a real ally for us, for Foreign Secretary Haig and now for Foreign Secretary Hammond. A question on that issue.
And the Duchess were just in Kosovo, right? Yes.
And it was wonderful, yes. Yeah, it was great. It was a great moment. In the Balkans more generally, actually, not just in Kosovo.
Right, that's true.
But a question on that. Well, I mean, what more would you like to achieve in Kosovo or the broader region on this issue? And will you stay personally involved? We hope you will.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And actually, 5 years ago, when I have taken over my office, I came across of the number of the women in Kosovo, which they have been victims of the sexual violence during the wartime in Kosovo as a tool of war, which they have been enormously stigmatized by our society for the continuous years since the end of the war. It was a taboo topic in our society, that it was a shameful thing for our people. It was something that supposed not to happen to us, or it did not happen to us. I have been experiencing personally some nasty debates within our society, within our own parliament, when I proposed the law to recognize the status of the civilian victims of the war, where the members of the parliament, 15 years after the war that time, were claiming to conduct the medical examination of those women. And that just made my brain blow up. I said, this is enough. These women deserve the same treatment like the rest of the victims in our country. These are survivors. They are our heroines. They are the heroes like any other hero in our country. for less than 2 years has made a lot of progress with the help of your government, with the help of the government of the United States. Now they have a legal status. Now they have the proper systems in place for their reintegration and resocialization. But what we are lacking is the lack of the justice and this culture of the impunity that is existing not only in Kosovo, but also internationally. Still, in all of the United Nations reports that are published every year by the Secretary General, this sacrifice, this horrible crime that has been done towards the civilian people, towards the women of Kosovo, is still not being recognized as the crime that has happened in our country, in the heart of the Europe in the 20th century. And we should not close our eyes to that, because we will not find the peace in our heart before they will find a justice and peace for the survivors of the sexual violence. 2 days before I came here, we had a visit of the Prince Charles, and we met a group of several women. 2 of them have made statements there. One of them was a mother, 38 years old, when she was raped. The same moment, her daughter, 20 years old, was raped. Her other daughter, 17 years old, has been raped. The other daughter, 13 years old child, was raped in the front of her husband, in the front of her mother. The mother, the same day, she jumped in the well and committed a suicide because she could not cope what has taken place there. The same minute, we heard another story of another survivor, that she was 6 months pregnant, 8 years after she was married, hardly waiting for her first child. Her husband was killed in front of her eyes, and she was raped in that very moment. Immediately, she lost her child. Since end of the war, we don't have even one single case of the person who has been convicted for the horrible crime that has been done in Kosovo. And we are in the 21st century. How long we are going to tolerate such as injustice done? And that has happened in doorstep of the Europe. Europe and the rest of the international community now is closing their eyes to that horrible crime that has happened there. And yes, I will continue because that is my personal.
That's what I was going to say.
And I will continue.
You do.
And I will
because you
continue.
made me feel very emotional about it.
I will continue to push hard till the moment that the lost victim has their eyes are being put in the surface. And we will have the perpetrators facing the justice which they have deserved, which has been late enough. Sorry for my emotions.
No, Madam President, really, thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, for the excellent address that you gave us, where you covered a lot of territory. Thank you for taking our questions. Thank you for sharing with us your passion for this issue. It is a really important issue, and as I mentioned earlier, it's important for Kosovo, it's important for the Balkans, but it's important for the world, because worldwide, violence against women has been used as a tool of war. So, thank you very much for everything you've done, and please keep up all of your good work on behalf of your country and all of us. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend.